Good afternoon, and welcome to another lecture dealing with pre-European contact to 1865 U.S. History Undergraduate Survey course. Today, we're going to be doing a lecture entitled Andrew Jackson, Villain or Hero? So Andrew Jackson was president from 1829 to 1837. His nickname was Old Hickory. He was known as the President of the Common Man. This was the first president that was elected by the majority of the populace of the common American, which would be non-landowners. Unlike previous presidents, he did not defer his presidential powers to Congress and policymaking, but he did use his powers of the veto and his party leadership to assume his command of the executive branch and as the head of the government. Jackson would take on the Second Bank of the United States. Yes, you've heard of the Bank of the United States. They were trying to recharter the Bank of the United States again. And remember, the Bank of the United States is a private corporation, and it was basically a government-sponsored monopoly, he saw it as. He vetoed the recharter bill, stating that it was an undue economic privilege that the government had. Jackson is going to encourage the adoption of Congress to sponsor and pass a bill for him to sign called the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Prior to this, Jackson had been a fierce advocate of removing natives in their land. The act established a process whereby the president could grant new lands west of the Mississippi River to Indian tribes that agreed to give up their homeland. They also provided incentives for the federal government to give them transportation to these new lands. They also provided them financial compensation in some forms or fashion. Let me remind you as well that these lands were out west, not the east in which these natives' lands had been. Reminder that these wars had been taking place against the natives and the United States, against the Creek, against the Seminole, against the Cherokee, and other tribes. The goal of the United States was to remove these natives and place them on reservations out west. To achieve his purpose, Jackson does encourage Congress to adopt the Removal Act of 1830. The act established a process whereby the president would grant these lands west of the Mississippi to Indian tribes that agreed to give up their homelands. Again, as an incentive, the Indians would get financial gain, material assistance in order to travel to their new location and their new lives, and they would guarantee that this new property they lived on would be theirs and protected by the U.S. government forever, so no one could take these lands away. However, years to come, it would be found out that these lands were usually not able to be used to process or make crops or to make a living. These lands were usually barren wastelands that these natives were placed on. With the act in place and Congress passed it and Jackson signed it, Jackson and his followers were free to persuade, bribe, and threaten tribes into signing removal treaties and leaving the Southeast. They were successful. However, there was one tribe that resisted. The tribe was the Cherokee. The Cherokee were a mainly peaceful tribe who had adopted early on the government style of the United States. They resisted by challenging the Georgia law that had restricted their freedoms on tribal lands in court. So they decided to go on a judicial route in order to restrict or challenge these laws. In 1831 ruling on Cherokee Nation versus the state of Georgia, Chief John Marshall declared that the Indian Territory is admitted to compose a part of the United States, and affirmed that the tribes were domestic dependent nations, and their relation to the United States resembles that of a ward to its guardian. So in other words, the United States had to protect these natives. However, the following year, the Supreme Court reversed itself and ruled that the Indian tribes were indeed sovereign or independent and immune from the Georgia law. President Jackson, however, decided to refuse to heed the court's decision. So he ignored the Supreme Court, and decided to go about and remove these natives after all. He went about obtaining the signature of Cherokee chief, agreeing to relocate in the Treaty of New Acanta, which Congress ratified against the protests of Daniel Webster and Henry Clay in 1835. The Cherokee signing party represented only a fraction of the Cherokee people, and the majority followed Principal Chief John Ross in a desperate attempt to hold on to their lands in the East. This attempt ended up not being successful. In 1838, when under the guns of federal troops and Georgia State Militia, these Cherokee tribes were forced to leave their lands and go to the dry plains across the Mississippi. This would become known as the Trail of Tears. You've heard of this probably, but the Trail of Tears is something that you have probably not really looked into. The Trail of Tears took into account about 3,000 to 4,000 out of natives, and about 15 to 16,000 of these natives died on their way to these new lands. So my question for you is, do you think Jackson, since he is now on the US's $20 bill, even though he did not like the Bank of the United States and vetoed that, he also had issues with the natives, and but he was a champion of the common man. At the same time, he did do a lot of things for the United States by bringing the government into a more modern way. So my question to you is, do you think President Jackson, is a good president? Or do you think he should be considered a criminal based on what he has done in the past? Many historians have debated such an argument. So based on this information in this lecture and the information that you have read in your text, we're going to discuss this idea of whether Jackson is a criminal or is a hero, basically. So thank you for coming to my lecture today, and look forward to hearing your opinions on whether he is a hero or a criminal and your support of your side in which you have. When completing the discussion response, make sure that you include in-text citation using Turabian form for any information in which you are not the author of the source. Make sure that includes any information you got from the text, any scholarly journals, or anything in which you got material from. As well as your response should be at least 250 words, and you should be responding to at least 2 people with at least 100 words in response, and make sure that it is a respectful response. If you have any further questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.